Good morning and shalom all. We come to the end of the book of 2 Samuel, chapters 23 to 24. Here we have another example of collective responsibility for the sin of an individual. This is David's sin in chapter 24. Before then, there's some other points to note. Reading from chapters 23, verse 1, the last words of David. Now these be the last words of David, David the son of Jesse said, and the man who was raised up on high, the anointed of God of Jacob, and the sweet psalmist of Israel, said, The Spirit of Yahweh spake by me, and his word was in my tongue. The God of Israel said, The rock of Israel spake to me. He that ruleth over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God. And I'll leave you to read the rest. Now David was such a servant of God that God spoke through him as he did with Moses, including the prophecies of, for example, Deuteronomy chapters 18:18, which said, I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren. We know this prophet came as Messiah, Yeshua. The first few verses reads as a prophecy about the Messiah. The first few words were just read out of David. Psalm 89:20. I have found David my servant, with my holy oil have I anointed him. Psalm 89:27. Also I'll make him my firstborn, higher than the kings of the earth. 2 Peter 1:21. For the prophecy came not in old times by the will of man, but by holy men of God. But holy men of God spoke as they were moved by the Holy Spirit. So when David in verse 3 says, He that ruleth over men, remember God instructed ruling to be via a book of his law in Deuteronomy chapter 17 verse 18, 31:26 and Joshua chapters 1 verse 6. Continue reading from 2 Samuel 23 verse 8. This is about David's mighty men. These be the names of the mighty men for whom David had. The Tachmonite that sat in the seat, chief among the captains. The same was Adino, the Eznite. He lifted up his spear against 800 whom he slew at one time. Verse 10. He rose and smote the Philistines until his hand was weary, and his hand clave unto the sword. And Yahweh brought a great victory that day, and the people returned after him only to spoil. The next person, verse 12. But he stood in the midst of the ground and defended it and slew the Philistines, and Yahweh brought a very great victory. So Yahweh is using men to bring victories. Verse 18, another person. And Abishai, the brother of Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was chief among three, and he lifted up his spear against 300 and slew them, and had the name among three. Another person, verse 21. And he slew an Egyptian, a goodly man, and the Egyptian had a spear in his hand, but he went down to him with a staff, and plucked the spear out of the Egyptian's hand, and slew him with his own spear. So notice, through the men, Yahweh brought a great victory. They were fierce, highly skilled, and courageous. One of whom was 2 Samuel, verse 23-39, we are told, Uriah the Hittite. 30 in all. Uriah was the husband, if you remember, of Bathsheba in 2 Samuel chapters 11. So David had one of his best fighters killed to cover up that sin he did. There are spiritual battles and physical ones. Both need preparation and skill and the correct tools. Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old he will not depart from it. It does not only apply to spiritual, but physical. Physical preparation that is, Genesis 14:14. And when Abraham had heard that his brother Lot, was taken captive, he armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. Now when people of God, as Abraham and David, were mighty, they had peace, success, and respect. When future generations of Israel adopted turn the other cheek? They lost those and became persecuted. Is that one of the deceivers' misinterpretations of the verse passed on to seekers today as to whom to turn the other cheek? In other words, we are under persecution politically and physically by other religions. Okay, going on to chapters 24, reading from verse 1, which talks about David taking a census of the people. And again the anger of Yahweh was kindled against Israel. And he, I'm going to come on to who he is in a minute, moved David against them to say, Go number Israel and Judah. For the king said to Joab, the captain of the host, which was with him, Go now through all the tribes of Israel, from Dan even to Beersheba, and number you the people, that I may know the number of the people. And Joab said unto the king, Now Yahweh thy God add unto thy people, how many soever they be, a hundredfold, and that the eyes of my lord the king may see it. But why doth my lord the king delight in this thing? Notwithstanding, the king's word prevailed against Joab and against the captains of the host, and Joab and the captains of the host went out from the presence of the king to number the people of Israel. And jumping on to verse 8. So when they had gone through all the land, they came to Jerusalem at the end of 9 months and 20 days. And Joab gave up the sum of the number to the people unto the king, and there were in Israel 800,000 valiant men that drew the sword, and the men of Judah were 5,000. So over 500,000 men. And said, remember, Uriah was not a Hebrew, he was a Hittite. We are told this in Genesis chapters 23, verses 33 to 34. Yet he made up the fighting men who were counted in the congregation of Israel. Plainly, as I said before, the congregation of Israel is not of one color or origin, but of one God and his leadership. Now coming back to the he who moved David. In my study Bible, there's a note that says the he is referring to Satan. I leave you to decide. If it is of God, then why would God move him to do something that he later punished him to do? But so sometimes the translations may give the wrong impression, unless you have a study material to go with it. Okay, going back to chapters 24, verse 10, the Lord's judgment on David's sin. And David's heart smote him. After that he had numbered the people, and David said unto Yahweh, I have sinned greatly in that I have done. And now I beseech thee, Yahweh, take away the iniquity of thy servant, for I have done very foolishly. For when David was up in the morning, the word of Yahweh came unto the prophet Gad, David saying, Go and say unto David, Thus saith Yahweh, I offer thee 3 things, choose thee one of them, that I may do unto thee. So Gad came to David and told him and said unto him, Shall 7 years of famine come unto thee in thy land, or wilt thou flee 3 months before thy enemies while they pursue thee, or that there be 3 days pestilence in the land? Now advise, and see what answer I shall return to him that sent me. And David said unto Gad, I am in a great strait. Let us fall now into the hand of Yahweh, for his mercies are great, and let me not fall into the hand of man. Verse 17. And David spoke unto Yahweh after God did what he did. Spoke unto Yahweh when he saw that the angel that smote the people, and said, Lo, I have sinned, and I have done wickedly. But these sheep, what have they done? Let thy hand, I pray thee, be against me, and against my father's house. And Gad came that day to David, and said unto him, Go up, rear up an altar unto Yahweh in the threshing floor of Arana, the Jebusite. And David, according to the saying of Gad, went up as Yahweh commanded, and Arana looked and saw the king and his servant come in toward him. And Arana went out and bowed himself before the king on his face upon the ground. And Arana said, Wherefore is my lord the king come to his servant? And David said, To buy the threshing floor of thee, to build an altar unto Yahweh, that the plague may be stayed from the people. And Arana said unto burnt sacrifice, and threshing instruments and other instruments of oxen for wood. All these things did Araunah as a king. All these did Araunah as a king give unto the king. And Araunah said unto the king, Yahweh thy God accept thee. And the king said to Araunah, Nay, but I will surely buy it of thee at a price. Neither will I offer burnt offerings unto Yahweh my God, that which doth cost me nothing. So David bought the threshing floor and oxen for 50 shekels of silver. And David built there an altar unto Yahweh, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. So Yahweh was entreated for the land, and the plague was stayed from Israel. So in that plague, 70,000 men, we are told, got destroyed as a result of David's individual sin. The nation paid the price of the atonement, same as in Judges, I think it was not Judges, Joshua chapters 4 or chapter 7, where Achan went and stole some of the loot and hid it under his tent, that first offerings loot. So offerings to God must cost us something. He does not need our money, but our heart, our actions, and our time as he has prescribed, not as we desire to give him, i.e. changing the days that he says we are to go before him. If we give him what we want to give him, when we want to give him, that is not a cost, but our pleasure and convenience. So again, as these studies are trying to urge you, learn what God requires of us and offer him the same. Shalom, until tomorrow, God willing.